Begin with coverage on the race for the White House. As you just saw, some Democratic leaders are asking President Joe Biden to end his campaign after his performance in the first presidential debate. But you heard the president say today he's staying in the race, planning to fight, and planning more public appearances in an effort to reassure voters. The First Lady of the country, Jill Biden, made a campaign stop today in Wilmington. WECT's Ava Brengord attended that event and heard Dr. Biden's announcement of a new program aimed at supporting veterans. Now, Ava, a packed house showed up for that campaign rally today.
Hey, that's right, John. The goal of Dr. Biden's visit was very clear, using the new initiative to remind voters of the president's work to deliver care and benefits to veterans and their families. Dr. Biden on the campaign trail in Wilmington. The First Lady held a rally at Highwire Brewing to help launch the Veterans and Military Families for Biden-Harris program. With North Carolina a key battleground state in the upcoming election and the state's close ties to the military, ensuring veteran support is critical to a win.
With 4 more years, Joe will continue to fight for you, the military community that we are humbled and proud to call our own.
The Biden administration is championing the PACT Act, which helped veterans who've been exposed to burn pits or other poisons file claims for health care or compensation. President Joe Biden signed the bill 2 years ago, and earlier this year, the 1 millionth claim was filed under the law, many of them Marines and their families who lived and worked at Camp Lejeune.
It is important to show that, like, us veterans aren't alone. That we're actually being heard.
Veteran Ian Appling was on hand for the First Lady's visit, and while it's clear who he supports, he isn't ignoring the elephant in the room. The big question, will the president stay in the race? Biden's recent performance at the first presidential debate has drawn criticism from some Democratic leaders. However, if this crowd and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden have anything to say,
For all the talk out there about this race, Joe has made it clear that he's all in.
they'll need these veterans and supporters for another battle for the White House. Now, we're seeing campaigning from both parties ramp up in the state. The First Lady's visit to Wilmington comes just 2 months after the president himself came to the city, announcing federal money to replace lead pipes across the country, and former President Donald Trump's planned rally in April that was postponed due to weather. Now, John, it's clear both candidates see North Carolina as up for grabs in November.
One of those battleground states that both parties really want to win. Ava, thanks.